Hey guys, tonight we're going to tuck ourselves into the quiet rebellion of barcode dreams and stitched logos. We're gliding into the slick, fluorescent world of Naomi Klein's No Logo, a book that doesn't just sit on your shelf, but slowly rewires how you see every shelf around you. It's the world of global branding, of megastores and micro-labor, of ad spaces colonizing not only billboards, but minds. Imagine the shimmer of a new sneaker, its box still warm from the stockroom, and realize someone made it somewhere. Someone else wore the cost you didn't see. It's all around you, and once you notice it, you probably won't survive this book unchanged. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Naomi Klein's No Logo opens in the lull of the 1990s, a moment of optimism, high-speed capitalism, and the seductive promise of choice. Companies weren't just selling products anymore, they were selling brands. And more than that, they were selling identities. The sneakers you wore, the coffee you sipped, even the phone you answered, it all said something about you. Except, as Klein gently peels back the glossy labels, the truth beneath is quieter and far more unsettling. The book's structure is clean, built like scaffolding around a cultural critique. It begins with no space. An examination of how corporations shifted their focus from manufacturing to marketing, turning real-world environments into branded experiences. Klein tracks this transformation through companies like Nike, Apple, and Starbucks, who realized that manufacturing was secondary to crafting meaning. The brand became the product. It didn't matter what was made, so long as it was felt. As Klein details, these brands turned once neutral spaces, schools, parks, libraries, sidewalks, into advertising zones. Sponsorships replaced public funding. Billboards multiplied. Logos bled into classrooms, basketball courts, even into children's textbooks. What was once merely a marketplace had become a mental space, a branded reality where thought and commerce slowly merged. Then we enter No Choice. In this section, Klein explores how the appearance of limitless options masks a thinning reality. Local businesses vanish as mega brands dominate. It's not a war of product versus product. It's a war of space, of reach, of exclusivity. Monopolies are built not through better quality, but through aggressive expansion and elimination of alternatives. Franchise chains become the only visible option, and suddenly, what looked like variety is really just repetition in new clothes. Here, Klein leads us softly into the world of cool hunting. Marketing departments no longer invent trends, they harvest them. Young people are studied, mimicked, and mined for raw authenticity. Subcultures become trial runs for global campaigns. Once resisting youth culture is turned into the very material of branding. Even rebellion, it turns out, can be sold if it comes with a logo. As you sink deeper into these pages, the narrative shifts to the third section, No Jobs. Having offloaded identity into branding, corporations also offloaded labor to the cheapest bidder. Factories closed in the West and reopened in export processing zones, isolated areas in developing countries, free from taxes, free from unions, free from the gaze of legal or ethical oversight. The people who made your clothes were invisible, voiceless, and cheap. That invisibility wasn't an accident. It was the system working perfectly. Klein brings in testimonies from young women working in these zones, places like the Philippines, Indonesia, Honduras. They describe long hours, locked bathrooms, sexual harassment, impossible quotas. You begin to feel the fray between the polished storefront and the sweat-wet factory floor. These workers weren't just making products. They were absorbing the costs of your choices. The final quarter of the book shifts toward no logo, the resistance. Activists, culture jammers, guerrilla marketers, and labor organizers rise like quiet waves in the dark. From Adbusters to Reclaim the Streets, people begin pushing back against the commercialization of space, identity, and labor. Students boycott brands. Protesters interrupt shareholder meetings. Fake ads mimic real ones to twist the message back toward truth. And perhaps most striking is Klein's tone throughout. It's calm, even gentle. There's no rage, no shrieking condemnation, just clarity. Her writing is surgical, not hysterical. She allows the reader to arrive at their own discomfort. She never tells you to stop buying Nikes. She simply asks, who made them? And where are they now? This is not a story of villains. It's a story of systems, of corporate strategies that follow logic, not conscience. You begin to realize that companies aren't evil. They're just very, very good at surviving, at optimizing, at reducing friction between profit and process. If they can sell you identity, they will. If they can erase their workers, they might. And somewhere in this realization lies the book's quiet power. You are not a passive observer of capitalism. You are its engine, its raw data, its oxygen. You are the market. So if something needs to change, the change must begin where you live, in the soft folds of your habits. Klein ends with a warning and a whisper. Branding will continue, adapt, and evolve. It will find new forms, colonize new spaces, cloak itself in new causes. But so will resistance. So will awareness. And if you're listening closely, you might even feel it stirring now. We slip deeper now into the meat of Klein's message, an exploration of the brand's metamorphosis. No longer just a logo or catchy jingle. The brand became an ideology, and its spread was more invasive than any of us had anticipated. In the late 1980s and into the 1990s, a fundamental shift took place in how companies viewed themselves. No longer satisfied with merely manufacturing goods and offering services, the new giants of capitalism began to see their primary product as meaning itself. The physical object became secondary, almost irrelevant. It was the story, the aura, the lifestyle, and the emotional tether that mattered most. Nike didn't just sell shoes, it sold transcendence. Starbucks wasn't offering coffee, it promised community. Apple began whispering revolution into your palm. This transition was subtle, but relentless. Slowly, companies outsourced production to anonymous factories scattered across the global South. Why be weighed down by machinery and employees when you could offload all of that to invisible hands? It freed the corporation to focus on its true craft, crafting identity. The brand evolved into a feeling, an experience to be cultivated, not a thing to be held. Klein describes how this brand-centric philosophy shaped the urban landscape itself. Shopping malls began to replace main streets. Public spaces were privatized, plastered with carefully curated ads. A Nike logo the size of a house might greet you on your morning commute, reminding you to just do it, even if you were still in your pajamas, half awake on a sluggish bus. In schools, Channel 1 beamed corporate-sponsored news directly into classrooms, turning learning into a Trojan horse for marketing. The word cool was no longer a descriptor, it was a weapon. Youth culture, once a rebellious frontier of creativity, was gradually colonized by these marketing machines. Through focus groups, lifestyle research, and predictive algorithms, corporations dissected teenage behavior with surgical precision, not to understand, but to sell. Every angst-ridden lyric, every tattered denim jacket became data to be mined. Even rebellion itself, those ripped jeans, pierced brows, and shrieking guitars, was packaged and fed back through glossy campaigns. Rage Against the Machine? Only if you bought the shirt. This wasn't just advertising, it was identity construction. Klein introduces the idea of super brands, those conglomerates whose dominance extends far beyond their product categories. Think Disney, whose empire spans from theme parks to childhood dreams. Or McDonald's, not just a restaurant chain, but a cornerstone of Americana. The aim was not just to corner a market, but to become a metaphor, Disneyfied, McJob, Google it. These weren't logos anymore, they were language. The rise of the brand also bred a new kind of corporate logic, one that favored scale, ubiquity, and symbolic capital over durability or social good. Klein recounts how corporations like Shell or BP invested more in greenwashing their image than in reforming their extractive practices. Their logos turned green before their policies did. It was cheaper and more effective to appear conscious than to actually be so. In this brave, new world of brands, factories were no longer part of the dream. They were a liability. So they vanished, hidden behind subcontractors and supply chains as long entangled as myths. The actual production of goods became deliberately opaque. Nike's sneakers were born in distant places. Indonesia, Vietnam, China, crafted by hands unseen, paid in silence, stitched into invisibility. The brand, meanwhile, floated serenely above the sweat. This floating, Klein explains, allowed corporations to transcend accountability. If something went wrong, say a factory collapse or a labor strike, it wasn't Nike's fault. They didn't own the factory. They just bought the shoes. This disassociation created a kind of moral loophole. Brands could beam utopian visions into our living rooms while maintaining dystopian realities abroad. Consumers were invited to sip frappuccinos with a conscience while supply chains told a darker tale of 14-hour shifts, locked dormitories, and wages that couldn't buy a latte in the country of consumption. And yet we bought in. We believed, because branding had become psychological infrastructure. It whispered comfort, aspiration, tribe. You didn't wear a Gap hoodie, you belonged to something. You weren't drinking Coke, you were sharing joy. This shift from production to projection, from goods to glow, is what Klein calls the brandscape. And within this brandscape, the market ceased to be merely economic. It became emotional, cultural, and even spiritual. Shopping transformed into a search for meaning. The mall, as some cultural critics said, became the new church. Its altars, window displays. Its hymns, jingles. Its sacred text, the receipt. As Klein maps this surreal transformation, she refuses to let the listener forget the cost. With every rebranding campaign, there's a ghost factory. Behind each glossy commercial lies an unpaid overtime shift. The sheen of Western affluence is often lacquered over someone else's exhaustion. And yet, the genius of branding was not just its reach, but its resilience. It adapted. It absorbed critique. When activists targeted Nike for labor abuses, Nike released inspirational ads about girl power. When Shell was accused of destroying the Niger Delta, it ran ads about investing in the future. The very act of being criticized became, somehow, part of the brand. This is the heart of what Klein identifies as a dangerous paradox. In an age of branding, sincerity is performative and ethics are optional, so long as you look like you care. Corporations no longer need to be responsible. They only need to appear responsive. And so, in the 1990s, we entered a strange terrain, one where the lines blur between citizen and consumer, public and private, real and advertised, where your sense of self could be purchased for $29.99 and your values shipped overnight with free returns. In this world, not even dissent was safe from branding. Even protest, if filmed in the right light, could be co-opted as a lifestyle. So we're left with questions that ripple quietly through Klein's pages. In a world where everything is branded, is anything still real? If our identities are constructed through consumption, what remains when the shopping stops? And most hauntingly, have we become complicit in our own commodification? We'll let those thoughts linger gently, barely brushing the edge of your mind, as we continue our slow drift into this surreal and slickly branded world. Now that we've peeled back the glossy surface of global branding, we're ready to confront the machinery beneath. The factories, the laborers, the cost of that shiny logo stitched neatly on a $200 hoodie. This section draws us into the economic underbelly of no logo, where Naomi Klein turns our gaze towards sweatshops, labor abuses, and the profound disconnection between production and consumption. She urges us to sit in the discomfort of knowing exactly where and how our everyday items come to be, and whose lives are stitched into every seam. The irony is hard to miss. Even as brands promise us a lifestyle of freedom, individuality, and expression, their business models are often anchored in the strict control of workers' lives. Picture the young woman in Manila or Dhaka or Ciudad Juarez, sitting bent over a table for 12-hour shifts, assembling sneakers she could never afford. That's not an exaggeration. It's the routine reality of what Klein calls the branded world. These are not isolated or illegal factories hiding in the shadows. They're integral, outsourced arms of billion-dollar companies who protect their image with the same vigor they avoid responsibility. It's in this environment that flexibility becomes a euphemism for precarity. Globalization, Klein explains, did not merely open up trade. It scattered production across a web of jurisdictions, with the most vulnerable always paying the price. When you split the design, marketing, and sale of a product from its manufacturer, you also sever the moral thread of accountability. Klein calls it the disappearing factory, where brands market experiences instead of things, and the things themselves are built by invisible hands in overlooked corners of the world. In the 1990s, as global protests against sweatshops mounted, big brands learned to play optics. They hired former politicians and PR experts to manage the fallout, releasing glossy social responsibility reports while subcontracting labor to third-party firms, making it almost impossible to hold anyone accountable. And the workers? They were told to be grateful for the job. Klein's writing doesn't indulge in outrage porn. It's precise, clinical, hauntingly matter-of-fact. She details the way global supply chains are optimized not for efficiency, but for evasion, for sidestepping labor laws, ducking tax responsibility, and outsourcing blame. It's a masterclass in the strategic behavior of modern capitalism, where legal loopholes are as valuable as patents. The deeper point Klein makes is structural. This isn't about bad companies, but rather about systems that reward bad behavior. The cheaper a company can produce a product, the more they can pour into advertising it. And advertising doesn't just promote the product. It seduces the customer into identifying with the brand. In that transaction, the sweatshop worker vanishes. This is where Klein's insights resonate with the blueprint of society itself. When we chase low prices and high status, we rarely question the conditions that allow both to coexist. But in this branded world, they only coexist because someone else is made invisible, stripped of name, voice, and legal protection. The reality behind a logo is not merely a factory. It's a ghost town of accountability, where every smiling model in an ad has a mirror image on an assembly line, bent over in silence. From a systems perspective, Klein invites us to step back and observe the patterns. This is not just about sweatshops, but about how corporations restructure their operations to obscure accountability. It's about the psychological calculus that encourages consumers to dissociate from production and the economic calculus that incentivizes companies to do just that. You don't need to lie if the system is designed so you never have to say the truth out loud. And that's the genius of level 3 awareness, when we stop blaming individuals and start tracing systems. When we learn that to change a result, we must alter the conditions that create it. Klein's brilliance lies in showing us that sweatshops are not an unfortunate side effect of capitalism. They're a feature of the current model, encouraged by trade agreements, legal ambiguities, and the pressure for profit growth. Change doesn't come from punishing a few bad actors. It comes from re-engineering the game board they've been playing on. So what can resistance look like in such an environment? Klein doesn't offer simple answers, but she does chronicle the birth of global labor movements. Young workers in Indonesia forming unions in defiance of threats. Students in North America staging sit-ins demanding ethical sourcing. And watchdog groups deploying covert cameras to reveal hidden truths. Small acts, maybe, but they pierce the veil. In that sense, the section closes on something close to hope, not naive optimism, but the kind that emerges when illusions fall away and a clearer vision is formed. It's the quiet, resolved kind of hope that doesn't expect instant transformation, but insists on seeing the invisible, hearing the silenced, and connecting the dots between a billboard on a highway and a girl behind a sewing machine. If the image of the girl behind the sewing machine haunts us, it should, because as Klein transitions in her final major theme, she makes it clear this isn't just about how brands are built, but how resistance builds in return. The real story of No Logo is not just one of critique, but of uprising, of creative sabotage, of people refusing to remain passive consumers and becoming active citizens in the face of branding's cultural dominance. By the late 90s, a new kind of protest was forming. Not just marches, but movements that used the logic of branding against itself. Culture jammers, billboard liberators, subvertisers, they didn't just criticize ads, they hacked them. They mimicked corporate slogans, redesigned logos to expose hidden truths, and used parody as protest. Klein paints this movement as both guerrilla theater and ideological warfare. Instead of burning products, they burn meaning, twisting slogans like "just do it" into "just don't," and Nike swooshes into sweatshop scars. It was messy, it was clever, and it worked. This wasn't a fringe phenomenon. Klein links these cultural interventions to a growing network of activists challenging neoliberal globalization at large. Those who gathered at the barricades of the World Trade Organization in Seattle in 1999. What united them wasn't a single cause, but a shared rejection of the logic that puts corporate rights above human rights. Whether it was environmental destruction, labor exploitation, or cultural erasure, the root problem pointed back to the same force: the unchecked power of transnational corporations, protected by trade agreements and unaccountable to democratic publics. What's powerful in Klein's account is how she captures the rhythm of resistance. Not a top-down revolution, but a distributed, decentralized pushback. She makes space for the radicals with spray paint and the lawyers challenging NAFTA, the hackers writing code and the farmers protesting patents on seeds, the boycotts and the buy-nothings. These are not all saying the same thing, but they are all saying no to invisibility, to manipulation, to the colonization of the everyday. And yet, Klein is not romantic. She knows that resistance has its own branding risks. Movements can be commodified, activists turned into influencers, and slogans co-opted into marketing campaigns. Rebellion itself can become a lifestyle product, sold back to us in distressed denim and punk fonts. That's the genius of the system. It doesn't just withstand critique, It feeds on it, metabolizes it, and sells it back as edgy authenticity. Klein calls it the commodification of dissent, and it's one of the book's most devastating insights. Even protest can be privatized. Still, she doesn't end in cynicism. What Klein offers is a kind of clarity, a moment of seeing the full machinery in motion, both the empire of brands and the underground of resistance. Once seen, it can't be unseen. She invites us to live in that tension, not as resigned observers, but as people who can choose where we put our money, our time, our stories. This isn't about buying the right products. It's about refusing to let products define us. It's about building alternatives, not just fairer factories, but fairer systems. Not just ethical labels, but ethical relationships. That's the radical core of no logo. The belief that identity, meaning, and justice can be reclaimed from the marketplace and rooted back in community, labor, and lived reality. In the end, Klein doesn't give us a 10-step guide to dismantling consumer capitalism. What she gives us is something more subversive, the tools to see, to name what was invisible, to trace the threads between power and perception. And in a world woven from logos, that act of recognition alone can be revolutionary. And once you've seen it, once you understand how branding operates not just on billboards, but in boardrooms, in classrooms, in your own identity, it's hard to unsee. That's where no logo leaves us, not with tidy solutions, but with a sharpened sense of perception. Klein doesn't claim to have dismantled the system. What she's done is much more enduring. She's rewired how a generation sees the world. Because from that point onward, logos stop being innocent. A swoosh becomes a sweatshop. A golden arch becomes a monoculture. A bitten apple becomes planned obsolescence. We begin to recognize that what surrounds us is not just stuff, it's symbols, systems, structures. Branding, Klein shows, is the interface of power in the post-industrial world, and knowing that changes your relationship to nearly everything. That's why this book fits squarely into level 3, society's blueprint. It doesn't just expose a broken system. It teaches us to recognize the patterns behind the system. We stop asking, why is this product so expensive? And start asking, who sets the price? Who gets the profit? Who bears the cost? We stop debating whether a company is good or bad and start decoding the rules that allow it to operate at all. Klein's core thesis, still revolutionary today, is that by chasing immaterial value, corporations have escaped material responsibility, and that escape has restructured the world. We see how outsourcing didn't just shift jobs, it hollowed out accountability. How corporate social responsibility didn't reform companies, it rebranded them. How choice didn't mean freedom, it meant fragmentation. This is what Klein helps us recognize. The branding era is not just a media story, it's a moral shift. And to live in it with awareness is to live always at a crossroads between complicity and resistance. But here's the uncomfortable truth Klein leaves us with. Resistance itself is exhausting. It's not always clear what to do with the knowledge she hands us. Can we shop our way out of consumerism? Can we boycott fast fashion while still needing affordable clothes? Can we resist branding without branding our resistance? And yet, maybe the point isn't perfection. Maybe the point is consciousness. Maybe Klein's gift is not a plan, but a lens, a way to move through the world that sees the invisible scaffolding of power and questions it. Because systems don't change all at once. They erode. They fracture. They shift when enough people stop obeying their logic. Klein shows us that even in a world saturated with brands, it's possible to step outside the hypnotic cycle of consumption and ask, who benefits? In that sense, no logo becomes more than a critique. It becomes a compass, not pointing toward utopia, but away from a default. It tells us, this isn't normal. This isn't natural. This is designed. And if it's designed, it can be redesigned. That redesign doesn't just happen in protests. It happens in how we teach, how we write, how we raise our children, how we participate in the economy. It happens when we choose slow over fast, context over slogan, substance over spectacle. Klein never asks us to abandon capitalism overnight, but she does ask us to stop pretending that brands have our best interests in mind. And that realization alone can reroute a life. Because once you understand that branding has colonized culture, the act of creating culture, real, uncommodified, participatory culture, becomes radical. Cooking becomes resistance. Community becomes infrastructure. Conversations, art, trust, these become the new battlegrounds, the new currencies. No logo doesn't just deconstruct the brand. It dares us to imagine life beyond it. And maybe that's the quietest, most powerful revolution of all. To reclaim meaning from marketing, identity from imagery, value from price. To live in a way that doesn't require a logo to feel real. So the question no logo leaves us with isn't just what's wrong with the world. It's what kind of world are we willing to rebuild? Not just outside us, but within us. Because once branding loses its grip on our desires, on our dreams, on our sense of what matters, then we're no longer just consumers in the corporate story. We're authors again. And maybe that's the logo-free future Klein wants us to wake up to. And yet, here we are, decades later, and the world Klein diagnosed has only become more immersive. Branding hasn't faded. It's metastasized. We no longer just consume brands. We live inside them. We wear them, speak through them, perform ourselves via them. They're in our bios, our feeds, our filters. In 1999, Klein warned that brands want to be your friend. In 2025, they want to be your personality. Which is why no logo still cuts with such clarity. Because it didn't just map a moment. It revealed a trajectory. Klein saw where we were headed. A world where meaning is manufactured, not discovered. Where companies don't just sell products. They sell worldviews. And now, with influencers with digital identities, with AI-curated ads that know your mood before you do, we see how deep the branding logic has sunk. It's not about shoes anymore. It's about selves. Back when the book dropped, people asked, isn't this just anti-corporate rage? But Klein's critique was never about hating companies. It was about understanding what happens when companies stop existing to make things and start existing to mean things. And once you grasp that shift from production to projection, you realize why everything feels so slippery, why shopping feels like activism, why politics feels like marketing, why rebellion itself gets prepackaged and sold back to us in limited edition drops. We've entered an era where resistance can be branded too. Think of Pride Month, corporate logos slathered in rainbows, while the same companies fund politicians who vote against LGBTQ plus rights. Think of climate campaigns fronted by oil companies. Think of billionaires tweeting about mental health awareness while gutting worker protections. Klein warned us, when corporations borrow the language of justice, they also defawn it. They reframe struggle as style. They make caring look cool, so long as it never costs them anything. And yet, even now, even in this hyper-branded landscape, no logo still offers tools, not just to critique, but to locate agency. Because once you recognize the patterns, you can interrupt them. Once you know the code, you can rewrite it. This is where Klein's work transcends its era. It's not just about globalization or marketing or sweatshops. It's about a mental jailbreak, about snapping the invisible thread that ties your identity to your purchasing power, about remembering that who you are is not what you wear or what you own or how aesthetic your morning coffee looks on Instagram. It's a reclaiming of the self from the spectacle, and that reclamation is spiritual as much as political. Because to say no to the logic of branding is to say yes to something else, to slowness, to depth, to sincerity, to things that don't scale or sell. It's to choose relationship over performance. It's to value the real over the polished. In a world constantly trying to convert your attention into someone else's profit, attention itself becomes a form of rebellion. That's what makes no logo timeless. It's not locked in the late 90s. It's foundational, like a cipher for decoding the present. It gives us language. It gives us lineage. It reminds us that every time we feel vaguely empty after scrolling for hours or buying something we didn't need, that feeling has a source. That alienation has architecture. And Klein handed us the blueprint. Today, when activism lives on TikTok, when aesthetic is mistaken for ethics, when algorithms determine what we desire before we desire it, we need no logo more than ever. Not because it has all the answers, but because it asks the right questions. And because those questions still echo. Who profits from our identities? Who decides what counts as cool, as credible, as authentic? What happens when every act becomes a performance? And can we ever unplug or have the wires grown inward? Klein never pretended to be above the fray. She never suggested we could escape capitalism cleanly, but she did suggest we could navigate it more awake, that we could notice the texture of the water we swim in, that we could piece by piece dismantle the illusion that there is no alternative. And perhaps that's what makes no logo endure. Not its rage, but its lucidity. Not its slogans, but its vision. In a world louder than ever, Klein teaches us the power of listening to history, to dissent, to our own unease. She reminds us that branding is loud on purpose. It wants to fill every crack in consciousness. But in those cracks, in the spaces between, something else can grow. Call it resistance. Call it awareness. Call it truth. Or maybe, in the end, don't call it anything at all. Just notice it and begin. And now, as we leave behind the glowing storefronts, the glinting logos, and the labyrinths of brand empires, let's allow everything we've heard tonight to gently settle. No need to hold onto every thread. Just let it drift like a kite, let loose from its string, higher and higher into the soft twilight of thought. You've walked through alleyways of identity, past shelves of commodified culture, and sat quietly in the back rows of anti-globalization protests, with banners fluttering like tired wings. But now the crowd has faded, the chants have quieted, and only the low hum of late-night city lights remains. In this moment, you don't have to remember Naomi Klein's chapters or the corporate counterattacks. You don't need to analyze what resistance means or how systems evolve. Right now, you're simply resting, wrapped in a gentle knowing that somewhere, quietly, truth persists even when brands roar. Maybe there's a whisper in the air tonight, a soft reminder that even amid complex systems and sweeping change, your own stillness is a kind of wisdom too. And maybe that's enough. So let your breath move a little slower now. Let the corners of your thoughts soften, like a mist creeping in over glass towers, or the final shimmer of neon before sunrise. Let all the brightness dissolve into a quiet hush. Whatever time it is where you are, 2:37 a.m. or 4:12, just before the birds stir, know that you're not alone. There's always someone else out there, also drifting gently into dreams, also hearing the soft echoes of stories that question the world. Sleep well, dear listener. You've done enough for today. Sweet dreams.